And you were talking about moving, and you were talking about, hey, if you have a Honus Wagner card. I did that just as I do with everybody. Little did I realize it hit a sore spot.
Oh yeah, I could have been a wealthy man.
Jeez. So why don't we talk a little bit about that story? Because it was, you had my jaw on the ground.
Well, my house had an unusual attachment to it. It was a hand-built garage, and it must have accommodated like a Model T or a Model A back in the day, and it had very high ceilings, maybe 22 feet. I mean, it was very high. And one day, I noticed that there were some cards or placards or something way up top, a good 20 feet up. And so I said, I wonder what that is. And so I got a ladder and I went up, and there are about 10, 15 vintage baseball cards. And one of them was a Honus Wagner. I knew that was very valuable because that was just talked about. But those were the days when I was a kid that, you know, baseball cards weren't valuable in terms of a there wasn't a collection phase and a collection craze of baseball cards, but of course there is now. So back then it wouldn't have been worth whatever 1.8 or 5.8 or 7.8 million, as some of them have gone for in the last few years. So I knew they were valuable though, because half of the players up there I didn't recognize their names. I mean, so I knew that they had to be players from the 1800s or the early 1900s, but the Honus Wagner was there, and so I took them all, and there was this one year. In fact, it was, I believe, 1961, because it was, I remember that, you know, when Ted Williams retired, Carl Yastrzemski came in, and that was the only year that I got the collection of every single baseball card that was printed that year. It was 625 or some thereabouts. I had every single one. And I had all the checklists and everything, and so I took the Honus Wagner and the other old cards, and I put it with this collection, and I put it in a box. And then when I left home to go to graduate school, I told my mother, don't throw these out. And that didn't last long, apparently, because they weren't gone the year. They were all gone the year I returned home after my first year in the doctoral program.
Well, spring cleaning did that for everybody's mother, including mine. And I could identify with everything you said, because I too had the 1961 complete set.
Oh, wow.
And I too, not quite a Honus Wagner story, but I had my older cousin gave me a 52 Mickey Mantle card.
Oh,
which
wow.
Which 2 was in that stack, which 2 got thrown out, so I can commiserate.
Oh, a Mickey Mantle, geez.
So where's hometown for you, Russ?
Lowell, Massachusetts.
Lowell, Massachusetts. And what'd your dad do for a living?
My father was a mill worker.
Okay.
And he first worked at Suffolk Knitting. And in the old days, he was known as a first hand, which meant that he essentially was the plant manager of the organization. And he was responsible for all the knitting machines to keep them all running. And if they weren't running, he had to go and fix them immediately. And usually it was stopped because of a broken thread. Well, my father was, I'm going to say, a brilliant guy, because he invented this knot. And it was so small, it couldn't be detected by any of the sensors that they had in those days. And that particular factory that he was working in during World War II was the one that made all the parachutes for the Army and Navy. So he had a real responsibility. And it's so funny because this knot actually came on to sort of save him as he was working his next job, because Suffolk Knitting moved to the Atlanta, Georgia area. He then went to work for General Electric in the wire and cable division, and they made wire. And guess what? The wire broke, and so he had the knot. And except the sensors at GE were much more touchy. They could pick up the smallest error, and his knot was not detectable.
Oh, wow.
It was not detectable. And so much so that almost every year, the vice president of operations for General Electric would come to the plant and ask my father to show him the knot. And he said, "Sure, I'll show you the knot." There it is. He would do it so fast that nobody could follow what he did.
What a great story. Now, so your dad was in that business, and
Yes.
What'd your mother do? Was she a home mother?
She was a homemaker, and then she also did. We were very active church-going Catholics, and my mother worked in the rectory where the priests lived, and as a housekeeper, part-time. I mean, she didn't have a full-time job, just a part-time job, and of course took care of us full-time as a family.
So you're an altar boy all the time.
Oh yeah, I was an altar boy, yeah. Yeah, and my brother, one of my brothers, my older brother, who has since passed, was in the novitiate to become a priest, and he left. There was some issues that he didn't like what was going on, and so he decided not to stay until the very end. But he was only 1 year away from being a priest.
So did you go to public school or did you go to a Catholic school?
I went to a Catholic grammar school, and I went to a Catholic high school. Then the high school was Keith Academy, it was a great education, absolutely great education. And then from there I went on to Lowell Technological Institute, which is now University of Massachusetts at Lowell, and then after that Boston University for my MBA, and then finally Indiana University for my doctorate.
You still have that Massachusetts accent.
Oh yeah, I parked my car in Harvard Yard.
So, do you have any Catholic school stories? I mean, the nuns rapping your knuckles? I mean, anything that's...
Yes. There were two of them that I'll relate. One was I was in I believe the second grade, and we were doing math and simple addition, and so the nun had put up, and it was Sister Mary Margaret was her name. So she put up a problem on the board and then asked one of the students to go up and solve it, and I don't remember what it was like 12 plus 6 or something like, it was an addition problem, and this kid went up and wrote the right number. If it was 12 plus 6, it was 18, and that's what the kid had put up on the board. And the nun said, "You're wrong." She said, "Write the right answer." And he said, "I did." And she said, "No, you didn't." And then she hauled off and whacked him one. And she erased the 18 that he had put up and started to write 16. And so I, rambunctious me, went up and grabbed the chalk out of her hand and wrote 18 again and said he was right. And she walloped me.
Oh, so you were Mr. Social Justice.
Well, I mean, the kid had the answer right, and he got whacked across the face for it.
Oh my gosh. So that's story one. What's story number two?
Story number two was we had our 8th grade class had a project going on where the nuns had said that they needed to raise some money, and I believe it was for scholarships to go to our school, for kids in the neighborhood who didn't have the wherewithal to pay for their tuition. Mm-hmm. And so we were to raise $500. That's what they wanted us to raise. And it turned out that I noticed in Sunday magazine, one of those Sunday brochures that they send out, that there was this company that was selling candy that they claimed was delicious and was perfect for fundraising, because the candy tasted so good. So the nun mentioned this, that we had to do a fundraiser, and so I said, well, is it possible for us to sell candy? And she said, I don't see why not. And she says, but how do you know the candy is any good? And I said, well, I guess there's one way we can find out. Let's order a can of the candy. And it was a hard candy. Mm-hmm. But they had these butter creams that melted in your mouth. So I love that buttercream, so I ordered a tin of buttercreams. Well, I opened it up in the classroom, and then everybody took a sample, and it was gone. The candy was so good. And so the nun said, okay, let's sell the candy. And it turned out that we ended up raising $5,000 selling the candy, because there was one kid, in fact, there was a kid, and by the way, I set it up so that if you sold so many cans of candy, you got a payment, you got a reward. So, and I don't remember what the rewards were, but let's say if you sold 200 cans, you got $5, something like that. It was some small amount, but when you're when you're a kid, $2 is a lot of money. Anyway, so this one kid sold like 1,000 cans, and was from one of the poorest families and she got she got the biggest reward, and I don't remember what it was, but she got that. And the funny thing was, though, that there was hell to pay, because what happened is we were in the midst of counting our money from the candy sales when all of a sudden a fire alarm went off in the building. So we had to vacate, and then we had to leave the money there. And so what happened is we came down the stairs, and the fire marshal came and we did a walkthrough and the whole thing, and it was over. Well, it turned out that our classroom was at the top of on the 3rd floor of the building, but where we were standing, there was a fire escape. So when we were dismissed, I ran immediately up the fire escape to make sure that none of the money had disappeared. And right after that, I was called into the principal's office, and because she said that I didn't follow orders, but there weren't any orders, but that I was supposed to go up in the internal stairway, not up the fire escape, and she hauled off and and walloped me one. Oh.
That's corporal punishment, man.
Yeah.
And summary, very summary judgment, no due process.
No. But anyway, that's the way it is.
Well, that's probably this concept of entrepreneurship probably led you to this whole area of your chosen profession.
Yes.
You went to Indiana and finance, master's of business administration. What was there an aha moment where you said, "I want to get into that arena"?
Yeah, I had this incredible opportunity this one summer. I was in the master's program at Boston University, and one of my professors thought that I was really capable, and so he recommended that I apply for the doctoral program, and so I actually applied to about 3 or 4 of them, and Indiana was one of them, and I got accepted. The others I didn't get accepted to because I applied too late. So because he didn't mention it until like January, and it was past the application date for most of the schools. But I applied anyway and got rejected, but accepted Indiana. And so I had this opportunity to go to Indiana, and I had also, because I had taken a lot of extra courses as an undergraduate, I had waived 10 courses in the MBA program. So after the first year, I only had 2 more courses to take to get my MBA, and it normally was a 2-year program. And so one of my professors asked if I would like to work for him as a research assistant. And his name was Sam Hanna, and he was in the brand new field called information technology. And he had started a company, and he had a consulting firm in information technology, and one of my classmates was working for him, and he had recommended that because we were in study groups together, that he had recommended to Sam that he hire me as his research assistant. And so he offered that to me, and I said, well, but I just got accepted to the doctoral program. He said, well, why don't you just postpone that for a year and work for me for a year, and you can also work for my company while you're at it. And I said, really? And he said, yes. Wow, I said, my goodness. That's quite an opportunity. But that wasn't the only opportunity that I then had thrown into my lap. I had 2 others. One was as a MBA student, I had a work-study job. So I was working as a statistician at Boston City Hospital for the doctors there in their research, and this was the days when the computers that they used were ribbons on a band. Yep. So I used to have to enter their data and then do the statistical reports that they wanted, and it was fun. And so that one of them had suggested that I apply for this Bureau of Labor Statistics summer internship program in Washington, D.C. And I said, I'll never get in that. Well, I won it. And so I had that. And then also in the spring of of my first year in the MBA program, I had done this course in organizational behavior, and I had gotten an internship to do a project for a company called Wheeler Associates, which at the time was the foremost company in the 4-day work week, which was a big craze back then. And they offered me a job too. And because I had done such a great job, we had actually converted an automobile dealership to the 4-day work week, and it had been successful, and so successful that Wheeler Associates got mentioned in the Boston Globe and in the magazines and so forth, and so they were ecstatic with me, and they offered me a job. So now I had all these things in front of me, and the question is, do I go to the summer internship program, come back and work for Sam Hanna, and then consider whether or not to work for Wheeler Associates after a year, or do I go to the doctoral program? And I went to the doctoral program. It wasn't a bad decision, but I often wonder what would have happened if I had chosen one of the other paths.
Yeah, but that's that. Everybody's got that moment in time. That moment. So you're in Indiana, 73 to 78. Basketball is king in Indiana.
Bobby Knight. Yep.
Was he part of your world then?
Oh yeah. I went to every game that I could get a ticket. You actually had to enter a lottery to get basketball. Oh yeah, and then what we would do is we would trade tickets if there was a particular team that we wanted to see. We would trade tickets with each other. But you couldn't get to see every game, but I probably saw about half the games during that period.
Was there any play that stood out?
Oh, they were championship teams, so they all stood out. I mean, Quinn Buckner and Bobby Nickerson and Kent Benson. Scott May was, and as a matter of fact, he was the one that, in the undefeated year, when Kentucky beat them in the NCAA playoffs, they had been undefeated, and in the game with Kentucky, he broke his arm, and so Indiana didn't win the national title that year, even though up until that point they had gone undefeated. But there were a lot of great players, and I mean I can't.
Well, you were there during a hot time, and was Bobby Knight as tempestuous at the time as? Oh
yeah, and he used to come once a year to talk. Most of the basketball players were business students, so he would come once a year and talk at a luncheon to the faculty and staff of the business school as a sort of thank you, and I mean, and he was as crude as as you can imagine. I mean, the things that he would say, he'd be all over the front pages for sexual harassment and other things for what he would say.
Well, he's probably thrilled that you were basically getting his players through school.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I had a couple of them in my classes, but I didn't have any of the big stars.
So after Indiana, where'd you go next?
I went to the University of Maryland, and what happened, which was unusual, I accepted the job to go to the University of Maryland, and I was on my way there, and my thesis advisor decided that he didn't think my dissertation could get published in the form that it was in, so he told me that I had to rewrite my dissertation.
While you're going there?
While I was on my way to Maryland. And so that totally discouraged me. So what happened is the chair of the Department of Finance at Indiana after I went to Maryland, he called me up and he said, come back here, finish your thesis, and then you can go back there if you want. So I said, I think you're right, because I'm not making. Oh, and Maryland, because I hadn't finished my thesis, penalized me and gave me an extra course to teach instead of freeing me up to finish my thesis. They made it more difficult. So I went back to Indiana, finished my thesis, and before I left Maryland, I actually renegotiated a futures contract. So I had originally gone to Maryland with a great salary of $15,000. I thought I was rich.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought I was rich. But when I went back to Indiana, before I left, I said, I want to come back, and will you accept me back? And they said, oh, sure, there'll be an opening, don't worry about it. I said, no, I want to have a contract signed up front, and I want a raise, too. And so they said, well...
You'll be a doctor.
Yeah. So I said, I'll take $22,000. So it was a $7,000 raise. And so they reluctantly said, okay, we want you to come back, because I had done very well in the classroom, and my research was very promising. So they gave me the futures contract.
Good for you, man. It put you almost in a class by yourself.
Yeah. So I went back. Then after Indiana, I went to, after Maryland, I went to Simmons College in Boston. Then I went to the University of Massachusetts at Lowell. Then I went to Fairfield University. Then I went to Adelphi University. Then I went to Stonehill College. Then I went to Lynn University. And then finally I went to SUNY Fredonia.
SUNY Fredonia is obviously how our paths crossed.
Yep.
And what drew you there?
Well, I had become known for getting places the Holy Grail, which is AACSB accreditation. I had gotten it for Fairfield University, and I had started all the other schools in the process. So I ended up finishing it at Fairfield, and then SUNY Fredonia wanted it, and I finished SUNY Fredonia with it also. So those were the only two that I took all the way through the process and got them accredited. The others all got accredited, but I only played a role in getting them pointed in the right direction and getting things sorted out for them.
You've been at SUNY Fredonia longer than other places.
Yes.
Any reason?
I liked it. Yeah, I was at Fairfield the same amount of time, 10 years. Well, it was actually 11 years. So yeah, it was a little one extra year at Fairfield. One extra year at Fredonia. You're
kind of a rock star. They're gonna miss you. They missed you, and you were the dean of the school, and a lot of the economic development people would, gravitate towards Fredonia, and you. I mean, you really had a name for yourself, and
thank you.
With that, and a personality, by the way, let's not lose track of the fact that you come across not like your standard. I'm an echo major, so I can say this from Allegheny College, and not like your normal professor who, pretty staid and didn't have a sense of humor. You had neither. Can you kind of get a sense of your philosophy towards just teaching? I mean, you went through a lot of students. It's not.
Yes. It's incredible. I've taught over 20,000 students in my career. I've done the exercise a couple of times because I just wondered. I wonder how many students I taught, and a lot of that has to do with I was always willing to teach the large sections with 500 students in them. So that's how the total got so high. I was always of the mind that we had to engage in what I call action learning, which is not just simply studying the book, but getting them in the class to apply it to an actual problem or an actual business situation, or working with a business to solve one of their problems. And I advocated that every place I went. And at Fairfield, we built a absolutely unique curriculum. And I was going to do that here at Fairfield, but at Fredonia, but we didn't do it that way. Instead, we added projects to as many courses as we could, and it was so successful at Fredonia that in 2016 we did 470 projects for the business community and for individuals and nonprofits, and had an impact on 7,000 people, and saved for the people of Chautauqua County over $700,000. That was, as far as I'm concerned, the biggest achievement of my career. Having done that, and I had to do it with all the faculty. We only had 14 faculty, and they did it. And what I did was facilitate it. So if somebody wanted to do something and they didn't have a connection, I lined up the connection. So, and some of them did it on their own because I was encouraging them to do it. And I have the report of that right here.
Well, I know, because I do a lot of work with the Industrial Development Agency, that work, thank you. That was the most amazing, not most, but it was an incredible project, and well received by the IDA and the county. It was incredibly so. So you took common problems and you turned them into opportunities. And I'm reading your bio here, right here, and it says your article, Roger Boisjoly, and the Challenger Disaster, the Ethical Dimensions, appeared in the Journal of Business Ethics, summer 1989, and is frequently cited by researchers and management practitioners, and recently selected for inclusion in the International Library of Management, Volume 1, as one of 1,000 most important management research articles of the 20th century. Tell me more.
Well, my oldest brother was the Morton Thiokol engineer who tried to stop the launch of the Challenger, and they ignored him. And of course, it ended up blowing. They thought it would blow up on the launch pad. Instead, it made it 63 seconds up and before it exploded. And then he testified against the company. The company tried to cover it up along with NASA. NASA tried to cover it up too. And he was a good engineer, so he had all of his notebooks. So he gave the Rogers Commission this big box with all of his engineering notebooks over the several years of time in which he worked on the O-rings. And he was in charge of making sure that the O-rings performed, and he would go and recover the booster rocket after each launch of one of the space shuttles. And so he had warned a year before that if they didn't fix the O-ring problem, then because what happened is if you think of I'm gonna just take this out. If you think it's an O-ring, okay, it wasn't this big around. Mm-hmm. It was more like this big around. Mm-hmm. But what happened is you have a clevis and a tang, and so what happens is it fits into a groove, and you'd have two O-rings between each section of the booster rocket. And what would happen is when the rocket started to fire, is it would move like this, and so it could it could bend a little bit this way or a little bit that way. And if it bent too far, in cold temperatures, then the O-ring would be exposed and would burn through. And that's what happened because on the morning of the launch, because what happened the night before was that the temperature dropped to like 22 degrees Fahrenheit. And so the O-rings were like hard like a brick and not pliable. And so what happened is when the vibrations of the actual launch took off, it exploded in midair.
So how did your brother feel about all this? I mean, when it's all said and done.
He was blackballed from the industry.
Was he?
And so what he did was, he had never become a professional engineer, so he got the certification as professional engineer. And then he actually was an expert witness in numerous product liability lawsuits against the very companies that supplied part of the materials for the booster rockets.
On the whole field.
Yes, yes.
So did he talk at all how he felt watching this on TV and kind
Yes.
of knowing what he said? What did he say?
He was absolutely devastated because he and he actually went to comfort all the surviving family members, and they all thanked him for providing the evidence because they knew that NASA and the Thiokol were trying to cover up the mistakes that they had made. And so they all thanked him. And then, of course, they got a gigantic a settlement from Morton Thiokol and from NASA for their families. But that still doesn't bring back, Krista McCall, it doesn't bring back any of the other astronauts. And so he was devastated by it his whole life. And he developed post-traumatic stress syndrome because it affected him so much. But what he did was he made a career out of talking to engineers in engineering schools all over the world. So he would do about 30 or 40 speeches a year to groups of engineers from MIT and Caltech and all the premier engineering schools brought him in to talk about what happened with the Challenger and what their responsibilities were as engineers. And he was very well regarded for what he did.
Your authoring such a story about your brother, was that to capture it or sort of to help him?
Both. I knew he needed to tell his story, and I knew that he couldn't do it himself. He would postpone doing it, and I knew him well enough to know that he'd put that off because it was too painful.
Right.
So what I asked him to do is just let me ask him questions, and if he answered the questions, then I and my colleagues would write the paper. And then when we wrote the paper, he loved it, and he came to several presentations that we made and participated in the discussions, and of course met my co-authors and really liked them. So it really helped him to have the article written. So.
It's remarkable. Also, replete in your bio is an awful lot of consulting jobs with every organization seemingly possible, every country seemingly possible. How does that happen? You're a professor at various universities, most recently SUNY Fredonia, but also having the access to and people reaching out to you. Does that come through companies finding you, or are you independently well known so they come to you directly?
No, there was a colleague that I had, Tom Conine, who had a consulting company, and he was at Fairfield University, and he had so many opportunities to speak to corporations, especially at GE, that he needed a backup, because oftentimes two companies would want to, or two parts of GE would want to schedule him for the same day, and he could only do one. So he said, I need a backup. Would you serve as the backup? And I said, sure. And he says, now you got to understand that if you don't do a good job, they're going to fire you. And they might fire you right in the midst of what you're doing.
How's that for pressure?
I said, yeah, couldn't you give me any pressure? So, and he was right. I saw numerous presenters get fired after an hour. They would go, they'd send the class on a break. You're fired. And and then they would come to me and say, "Can you fill in for him?" That happened a fair number of times, maybe 10, during my career, where I filled in for somebody who wasn't cutting the mustard.
So what was the go-to subject? So when they look for Russ Boisjoly subject matter, what is it they want to get?
Well, I did finance, yes, and we had, for some companies, some divisions of companies, we would do a finance for non-financial managers course. But usually what we were doing, we were part of a bigger course, and we would come in and do 2 days of finance, and also we were expert at working with groups to do action learning. So we would what the companies would do is they would tell the employees to bring in a problem that they were having in their business, and then we would supervise. We would teach them basics, and then we would supervise them solving the problem, and then they would make a presentation to executives to highlight the solutions to the problems that they had in their businesses. And we did that an awful lot. I also taught a course called Essentials of Business at Boeing, EOBB. In that course, which I taught with a Boeing employee numerous times, we actually restructured the commercial aircraft business so that they could now create the hybrid material that they used instead of aluminum when they went to composites. And so they had various composites business in the company, and they merged them all together and then built the new airplane, which is now flying. It's all composites. It's made with composites. And we helped them restructure the company so that they could do that. That was quite a nice challenge, and a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. We also did a course called Critical Thinking, which was for higher up executives. They would come in, and we would put them in teams, and we'd have them compete against each other, and to solve various problems. And in that course too, there was one problem that they would bring in from the outside, from their business, and they would work on doing the best solution relative to the other groups, even though the problems were different. they had to come up with a good solution, and the other teams could ask them questions about their solution. So we had a lot of fun.
Does Six Sigma fit in all of that
Yes.
concepts?
Yes, of course, GE was a big proponent of Six Sigma, and all the measurements that we conducted all had to accommodate the Six Sigma methodology. And we actually taught the Six Sigma course the applications of Six Sigma after they were taught the actual basics of the statistical part of the course. We actually then taught a course in the healthcare business where they actually had to apply it and again solve a problem in the business and using Six Sigma methodology. So yeah, we did a lot of work with Six Sigma in General Electric primarily, a little bit in some of the other businesses, but not too much.
Yeah. I just remember, because again, economics, where I was started, ended up in law, but Six Sigma, and I know a guy like Bruce Janowski, you know Bruce here in Jamestown Container, he was really big on that stuff. As you reflect now, I mean, now you are kind of retired. Are you still consulting?
I am retired.
Retired?
No, I'm not, I haven't consulted in about 6 years.
So you are retired, and you're actually going to go to Maine.
Yep.
And buy a lobster boat. What are you going to do here?
No, I intend to have a workshop and build whirligigs.
I give up. What's that?
And sell them. You know, like you see them on a roof. A sailor with a boat, and it blows with the wind and points in a certain direction.
That's what they're called.
That's one example of a whirligig. Yeah.
Fantastic. Now, you probably, having consulted with all these people, wondered if you could make a widget and make it saleable.
Yep. I think I can, but we'll see. It's another challenge.
Oh, well, that's now. Just always curiosity, because there are an awful lot of educators / consultants. Did you ever have the desire to say, I could go into business, I could do this and make some money, some serious money?
Yeah, I did for about 4 years. When I was teaching at Adelphi University, my wife was teaching at Simmons College in Boston, and she tried desperately to get a job down in the New York City area, but as a result of her background, and as a result of the conditions at the time, and she was a occupational safety and health nurse, and she also did community health nursing and taught it. But what happened is when she applied for jobs around the New York City area, everybody was looking for geriatric nurses, not anything in her field, and so we couldn't end up working together, or at least working nearby to each other, so that we could live in New York City or in Garden City where Adelphi was. And so what happened is I got a phone call from her one Saturday afternoon, and she said, you have to come home, and if you don't come home, I'm going to divorce you.
There you go.
And so I said, okay. So I went. She was in Philadelphia, so I went down to Philadelphia to see her right away. And then what happened is I quit Adelphi, and I worked 4 years straight as a consultant. And I did make the big money. Although I was making pretty good money. I was essentially working 2 jobs during most of the time I was a dean. And all of the things were relevant to being a dean because I could make connections for my students and for the faculty, but also you know, I got some of the faculty consulting jobs too, and you know, things just worked out. So and when one of the executives at GE or GTE or 9X or saw the president of the university, you know, they were always saying, it's great to have Russ working for us. Yeah. So that didn't hurt my, you know, hurt my position at the university. Actually helped.
Not. No, it helps it. You knew you were coming down today to talk to me, and is there a question that I should be asking Russ Boisjoly right now that I haven't?
No, I don't think so.
Give me your best Boston Red Sox memory.
My best Boston Red Sox memory. Wow. Well, I saw Ted Williams on TV take his last at bat. Mm-hmm. That was an important one. I guess I don't have one. You know, it's.
In that area, one thing nice about that, you only have one team, so you can only.
Yeah.
For baseball, when it comes the Red Sox, it's not like you have competition.
No, my father would take us to the doubleheader on 4th of July when we were kids. It was always the Washington Senators.
Yeah, they played 2 games.
Yeah, played 2 games.
For the price of one.
For the price of one, and
my dad does the same thing.
But I never got to go to too many games because when I had the wherewithal, the only thing that I could afford to go to and get a ticket to, because the tickets were so scarce, was opening day.
Yeah.
So I did go to about 15 opening days at Fenway Park.
Yeah.
But you know, once the season got going, especially as it got towards the end, you couldn't get a ticket.
Yeah.
And even if you paid $1,000 a ticket.
It's crazy stuff. Well, Russ, this has been most amazing. I really enjoyed learning about you.
Well, thank you.
And we're gonna miss your laugh and your personality, and it's just been fun. So thank you.
Well, that's actually because you know, because I have a presence that and talking to people. You know, I was able to do all the consulting for all the companies. I taught all these companies. I taught their executives, and in the case of General Electric, too, when they had the capital services business, they were transferring most of the operations over to India, and so there was 1 year where every 2 weeks I went over to India to teach 100 new employees about GE, and then I would I did globalization modules, I did finance modules, I did critical thinking modules, I did the project courses, and we did other individual courses for the individual businesses, and we also taught courses for GE customers. So like China Jibei Airlines and China Eastern Airlines were both customers of the aircraft engines business. Okay. So we got to interact with them, and the companies from China insisted that that they get the best, one of the best instructors that GE had. So I was lucky. My co-associate was the same. I mean, he actually taught more of the customers than I did, but I got a fair number of the customers too.
What an experience. Hopefully you'll write a book.
Nah.
Well, this has been, thank you.
Okay.
This is terrific.